Okay, we're going to be doing number 28 on the exam review. And what we have to figure out is what quadrant theta lies in for A, B, and C. So let's start off with A. Now, the easiest way for us to do this problem, I think, is going to be by thinking of cosine and sine as x and y. And that's pretty much going to be the general rule for doing all three of these problems. So let's start off with cosine. We have to find out when cosine is greater than 0, which is easy enough. That's going to be going to the right half of the circle. Now, we also need to find out when sine is going to be negative, which will be down in this quadrant below the x-axis. Therefore, that is going to put us into quadrant 4. So that one's easy enough. Now, moving on to problem B, I think the easiest way to do this is to rewrite cotangent and secant in terms of sine and cosine. Now, because tangent is because tangent is sine over cosine, cotangent is just the inverse of tangent, which is going to mean that cotangent is just cosine over sine. So let's just write that out. And that has to be less than 0. And now secant is just the inverse of cosine. So we'll write that out like this. And that also has to be less than 0. Now, I think the easiest way to go about doing this one is to find out where cosine is going to be negative, which is just the x. And that is going to be on the left side of the circle, going this way. Now, because the cosine has to be negative because of this part of the problem, that means that this cosine is also going to be negative. Now, because this is negative, sine is going to have to be positive in order for this to stay true. So, sine is positive in this quadrant while cosine is still negative. Therefore, this is our answer, and that is quadrant number 2. Now, problem C, we are going to be dealing with cosecant and tangent. And like I said, let's just take the same approach as we did in B by changing these two into terms of sine and cosine. Now, cosecant is just the inverse of the sine function. So that's just going to be 1 over sine. That has to be less than 0. And tangent, like I said earlier, is just sine over cosine. Oh, and I'm sorry, that has to be greater than the 0, which makes it positive. Now, keeping in mind that if you divide two negatives, that will still get you a positive number. And keeping in mind that that sign right here has to be a negative number, then naturally that's going to take us to cosine being negative, which is to the left side of the circle, but sine also has to be negative, which would be going below the x-axis, which winds us up in this quadrant right here, which is going to be quadrant 3. So not too difficult for these problems. Just remember that for B and C, the easiest way is to just translate the cotangent, the secant, the cosecant, and the tangent into terms of sine and cosine, and then figuring it out from there.